Dashiell The Journal of Dashiell Sanford Doyle, Sins of the Living, Secrets of the Dead, November 17th through December 13th. Dash's journal entry, November 17th, Part 1. The air was thick, not just with the lingering damp of the evening, but with the kind of tension you could cut with a blade. 10 bounty hunters stood in our way, each one looking like they'd seen more than their share of fights and lived to tell the tale. They weren't the usual riffraff either. Each movement was calculated, disciplined. They were here for one thing, Jewel. Word had gotten out about the 500 gold bounty on her head, and greed and revenge had brought them here like vultures circling a fresh corpse. The leader, a grizzled, broad-shouldered man with a face like an old leather boot, had his crossbow trained on us. He sneered, barking out commands to his crew as they fanned out, cutting off our escape. It was Eli who stepped forward, calm as a summer breeze. He raised his hands, palms open, and gave them a look like he had the situation under control. "You don't need to fight us," he said, his voice steady, confident. "We'll pay you the 500 gold and let you walk away." It might have worked. Eli had a way of making even the worst offers sound reasonable, but the leader wasn't buying it. "Make it 1,000, he growled, his voice as rough as the axe he carried. Eli hesitated for just a moment. That's when I saw it, the calculation in his eyes. He was stalling. It was a gambit, and he was trying to play them. But the leader wasn't going to wait. The crack of a crossbow bolt firing cut through the night, and just like that, the negotiations were over. Zenith was the first to move, charging forward with her axe flashing in the dim light. She didn't hesitate, slamming into their front line and locking down 2 of them before they could react. The fight had begun in earnest, and the rest of us scrambled to keep up. A smoke bomb went off, enveloping the battlefield in a choking gray fog. Shadows flickered and moved in the haze, and for a moment, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the space around us. It was chaos, pure and simple. Sky shifted in a ripple of fur and muscle, her form melting into that of a sleek, deadly panther. She prowled, silent and swift, pouncing on one of the archers who was trying to nab the girl. Her claws tore into his side, and he screamed, stumbling back. Astra stuck close to Jewel, her guard raised and her eyes darting to every corner of the fight. The kid clung to her and Sky like a lifeline, trembling but staying quiet. As for me, I kept in my corner, pulling out my hand mirror. I stared into my reflection and whispered, "Mirari Imago." 3 perfect copies of me stepped out of the glass and scattered into the fog, confusing the bounty hunters. One of them swung at a duplicate, his blade slicing through empty air, giving me just enough time to prepare my next move. I grabbed a handful of sand from my pouch and rubbed it onto my forearm. My left hand gripped my right as I whispered, "Tamir." Green fire roared to life along my arm, and I stepped forward. One of the hunters, a wiry man with a cruel smile, came at me with the short sword. Before he could strike, I latched onto his face with my glowing hand. The necrotic energy surged through him, and he dropped like a stone. Eli was at my side in moments, his staff spinning in wide, defensive arcs. Together we held off a wave of attackers, his strikes buying me time to cast and my illusions keeping us both from being overwhelmed. But the fight wasn't going smoothly. The hunters weren't just skilled, they were relentless. They stayed coordinated even as we pushed back. Zenith was holding her ground, but she was outnumbered. Sky's panther form was formidable, but the archers had shifted focus, trying to pin her down with a hail of bolts. And then there was the mask. In the middle of the chaos it appeared, not on my face but on Zenith's. One moment it wasn't there, the next it was, its features twisted and eerie in the dim light. It was like the mask had a mind of its own, and that thought chilled me more than any of the blades swinging my way. Smuggy's sloths joined the fray, bumbling through the fog and adding a layer of confusion to the battlefield. One of them latched onto a bounty hunter's leg, tripping him up and sending him sprawling. It was ridiculous, but it worked, buying us a few precious moments. By the time the smoke began to clear, the ground was littered with bodies. Blood pooled in the dirt, and the air was thick with the coppery tang of it. We were still standing, but only barely. Zenith was bleeding from a nasty cut on her arm. Sky shifted back to her usual form, breathing heavily as she wiped the blood from her face. Jewel clung tightly to Astra and Sky, her eyes wide and wet with tears. She looked from one of us to the next, like she was checking to make sure we were all still alive. It had been close, too close. We didn't walk away from this fight victorious. We limped away, battered and exhausted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Dash's journal entry, November 17th, Part 2. The dust from the fight was still settling as the sun crept higher in the sky, painting the clearing with a deceptive serenity. My chest burned, my limbs were leaden, and the adrenaline that had carried me through the skirmish was fading fast. It was over for now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last we'd see of those hunters. We regrouped, battered but standing, with Jewel clinging to Astra and Sky. Poor kid had been through hell, and seeing her curled into herself like that only twisted the knife deeper. I kept my distance. My brand of comfort isn't exactly child-friendly. Instead, I busied myself helping Eli sift through what remained of the bounty hunter's gear. Most of it was junk, but the mask Zenith pulled off her face, that was something else. The mask had an eerie, almost magnetic presence, like it was watching us even when no one was holding it. Zenith peeled it off like it weighed a ton, her expression unreadable. I didn't ask questions, but the thing gave me a shiver I couldn't shake. It ended up tucked away, out of sight, but never really out of mind. As for Jewel, it became clear we had a bigger problem on our hands. Galpont showed up with his right-hand man, Gondor, and they weren't exactly thrilled about harboring a werewolf in the town. Galpont's face hardened when Eli explained how things had spiraled out of control. The bounty hunters hadn't been your run-of-the-mill opportunists. They'd been here to collect on a 500 gold reward for Jewel, dead or alive. Eli mentioned trying to negotiate during the fight, a gambit that had almost worked until their greed got the better of them. Demanding 1,000 gold? That sealed their fate. Galpont grunted in response, his focus shifting to Jewel. Gondor, meanwhile, looked like he was about to jump out of his skin every time the word werewolf was mentioned. It didn't take long before the subject of the full moon came up. Jewel was scared, understandably so. Chaining her up wasn't anyone's first choice, but Astra and Sky worked hard to calm her down, convincing her it was the best way to keep everyone safe. She agreed reluctantly, her eyes wide and wet with worry. I kept my mouth shut. What could I say that wouldn't make things worse? Meanwhile, I dragged myself to the barracks. Smuggy and his sloths were already there, humming some off-key lullaby as he drifted to sleep. Eli wasn't far behind, collapsing into the nearest bunk like a dead man. I waved them both off, lighting up a smoke to take the edge off. I could hear Sky recounting the fight to Galpont, though she glossed over the more questionable details. Smart move. When she finally came in, her face was a mix of exhaustion and quiet triumph. Zenith followed not long after, still guarded as ever, though I swear I caught her eyeing the mask as she tucked into bed. The room was quiet as I cracked open my journal. The only sound the scratch of my pen and Smuggy's muttering. As I jotted down the day's events, I couldn't help but wonder if we'd made the right call. The hunters were gone, the girl was safe, for now, but the shadows were only growing longer. For now, though, I'll take the rest. Who knows what's waiting for us tomorrow? Dash. Journal entry, November 29th, 2024. The Night Blooms Tavern wasn't its usual lively self that evening. The weight of the full moon hung over us like a storm cloud as we debated how to keep Jewel and everyone else safe. Ideas were thrown around like darts in the dark, chaining her up, locking her away, or even trying to find a cure for her affliction. I kept quiet, letting the others debate, though the sinking feeling in my gut told me none of this would end well. In the end, we decided to dig a hole. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best we could manage with the time and resources we had. Smuggy worked his magic, literally, using mold earth to carve a pit into the ground near the town's edge. Watching him, I couldn't help but admire how effortlessly he made it look. Even as I joked about the whole situation, we lined the hole with bedding and tossed in some food, trying to make it less like a prison and more like a safe haven. Jewel was hesitant, and I didn't blame her, but Astra, always the voice of calm and reason, stepped in to reassure her. Jewel agreed, on the condition that Astra would stay with her through the night. That, I thought, was a terrible idea. But Astra was firm, and Jewel seemed to trust her. As the sun set, Eli and I stood watch over the hole. It was quiet work, and the stillness made the knot in my stomach tighten. I couldn't shake the feeling that this plan was a house of cards waiting to collapse. Eli, on the other hand, seemed oddly excited. Even joked about fighting a werewolf, a glint in his eye that made me wonder if he saw this as an adventure rather than a potential disaster. Then Jewel vanished. One moment, everything was still. The next, she was gone. Smuggy and Eli took off to track her down, while Zenith and I stayed behind to guard the now useless hole. I smoked a cigarette and stared at the empty pit, frustration simmering beneath the surface. This plan had felt wrong from the start, and now it was crumbling before our eyes. When Eli returned, he told us Jewel had been found in the orphanage cellar. Zenith and I followed him back, and soon the entire group was barricading the cellar door. Jewel was already transforming, and the sight of her shifting form sent a chill down my spine. Then Astra did the unthinkable. She decided to stay in the cellar with her. I didn't stop her. Maybe I should have. Maybe I could have. But in that moment I was too stunned, too unsure. The door slammed shut, and we braced ourselves for the worst. Hours passed in tense silence. Smuggy and Sky somehow managed to nap, which boggled my mind. Eli paced like a caged wolf, clearly struggling with the group's decisions. I stood watch with Zenith, my eyes flicking to the barricade every few seconds, half expecting it to burst open. When morning finally came, we unbarricaded the door with weary hands and found Astra and Jewel sleeping back to back. There was blood on Astra on the floor, but no sign of a fight. Somehow, against all odds, Astra had calmed the beast. I don't know how she did it, but it left me feeling equal parts relieved and awestruck. Jewel seemed different after that, calmer, more affectionate, especially toward Astra. As the sun climbed higher, Smuggy and I filled in the hole, our failed plan now buried along with my earlier frustrations. I couldn't help but feel a lingering unease. The night had ended without a fight, but that didn't mean we were safe. What happens next month, or the month after that? The barricade held this time, but will it hold again? For now, we made it through, but this group is a magnet for chaos, and I can't shake the feeling that the next storm is already brewing. Dash. Journal entry, December 7th, 2024. The day began with a hint of tension as Lieutenant Caft introduced Jonah, a new recruit fresh from training, who would be joining our group. Zenith and I volunteered to test Jonah in a mock battle, giving him a crash course in teamwork. The fight was short, but it reinforced the importance of working together effectively, something we'll need to remember moving forward. Afterward, we found ourselves with some free time. For me, exhaustion finally caught up. Staying up all night had left me drained, so I headed to the tavern for a drink before retreating to the barracks to catch some much-needed sleep. Jonah and I had been getting along well. He's a straight-up kind of guy, though I'm still keeping my cards close to my chest. While I rested, the group continued to make their way through the day. Later, after waking and heading back to the tavern to regroup, things took an unexpected turn. Lieutenant Caft brought troubling news. Eli was leaving. The note he left was blunt and left me with mixed feelings. I was disappointed but kept my thoughts to myself, lighting a cigarette to mask the frustration. Not long after, Caft and the mayor arrived in a panic. Fiona, an important figure from the Kulanasian Empire, had been abducted from her shop. Her disappearance raised concerns about the potential for a military response if Bosian forces were tied to the rescue. However, we convinced the mayor that we could go in as independent adventurers, completely disassociated from the Bosian military. The success of this mission now rests on our ability to remain stealthy and avoid detection. To start our search, we investigated Fiona's shop for clues. The place had traces of magic lingering in the air, and we spotted faint, suspicious footprints that hinted at foul play. Whatever happened here wasn't random, it was calculated. With the evidence pointing us towards something nefarious, the stakes feel higher than ever. This mission is delicate, dangerous, and more personal than I anticipated. We'll need every bit of cunning to pull this off without sparking an international incident. As for me, I'll keep my eyes open, not just for Fiona, but for anyone who might be connected to the mysteries I've been chasing. Dash. Journal entry, December 13th, 2024. The journey continues as we head west, following leads that might get us closer to Fiona. The tension among the group is palpable. There are still loose ends we've yet to tie, and everyone seems to have their secrets. During our travels, I decided to prod Zenith about the mask she's been carrying. She deflected, asking about the bag of holding I've been keeping. Fair enough. This bag has been a source of mystery for me too. We made camp for the night, and Jonah and I took the first watch. Jonah was preoccupied cleaning his gun, while I found myself staring at the bag of holding. When I looked inside, something was off. 3 eyes instead of the 2 I'd seen before. Curiosity got the better of me. I tipped the bag over, and the sound of 3 heavy thumps shattered the night's stillness. 3 creatures emerged, the dreaded bagmen. Their sinister forms began to animate, and Jonah and I barely had time to react before we called the group to arms. Sky transformed into a giant badger and burrowed underground to prepare for an attack. Smuggy summoned sloths, which immediately jumped into action, dealing some damage to the bagmen. Astra's firebolt found its mark, while Zenith, in her rage, struck one of the bagmen hard, only for the cursed mask to appear on her face once again, boosting her power. The bagmen proved to be relentless foes, hitting hard and forcing us to rethink our tactics. My mage armor absorbed some of the impact, but I still took a solid hit. Every blow they landed reminded me how dangerous they are. The mask on Zenith continues to unnerve me. It seems to grant her immense strength, but at what cost? The battle rages on, with each of us doing our best to keep up. We've faced tough fights before, but something about this encounter feels different, like it's testing more than just our combat skills. The bagmen are powerful, and their presence raises even more questions about the bag, the mask, and the challenges ahead. For now, survival is the only priority. Dash.